Next.
हा आणि
pre-test or?
Sir, no pre-test today. We'll start with the session, sir, today.
Okay, fine. No problem.
Okay. We are waiting for the participants, sir.
Okay, what about the feedback?
Yes, sir.
Yesterday's feedback.
Sir, feedback is planned at the end, sir.
Okay, you are not doing on the day-to-day basis every day?
No, sir, we have not planned for day to day.
Okay. But usually if you take, what was the session rating for yesterday?
And we are going to take the whole 1 week program feedback, sir.
You are not audible.
Sir, total 1 week, last day we are going to take the feedback, sir, all sessions.
Okay.
Very good morning to one and all. Now we will start the session. Once again, welcome for this AICT sponsored quality improvement program conducting the Department of Pharmacy Practice, KLE College of Pharmacy, Belagavi. So yesterday we have completed successfully for 1 day session. The first was inauguration, followed by historical perspectives in clinical research and ICMR guidelines for ethics committee review. Then followed by the medical writing, how to submit the protocol and all. So these things we have completed yesterday. So now we will start the today's session. Once again, welcome you all. So now we have a today's speaker, Mrs. Gitanjali Salimat ma'am, Assistant Professor, Department of Pharmacy Practice, KLE College of Pharmacy, Belagavi. I welcome you, madam, for this AICT sponsored QIP program. So madam has completed her graduation and post-graduations from the our institutions, KLE College of Pharmacy, Belagavi. And madam is about to submit her PhD work. She has total experience of 12 years, in which 10 years of academics and 2 years in the clinical research department. And she has worked as an assistant coordinator, and she was the scientific member for Institutional Ethics Committee, KLE Academy of Higher Education's Research, Belagavi. 3 years, and at present works as an IEC, administrator for the same. And she has the convener for SAE review subcommittee, and she was the member for Allied Health Sciences at CAHER. So she is the holding the responsibilities of UDHP coordinator of Kelly College of Pharmacy at university level. So she has worked in clinical research as a clinical research coordinator for various diseases like antilipidemic as well as anti-rheumatoid arthritis and pediatric vaccine trials and all. So Madam has guided 23 students of MPharm and PharmD and MSc clinical research students. Madam is having 10 publications and she has presented posters and oral presentations at national and international level. And recently she got first place in oral presentation at 55th IHPA Virtual Annual Conference 2021. And one of her PG student dissertation got Best PG Dissertation Award for 21-22 at Kelly Academy of Higher Education and Research, Belagavi. So with this brief introduction, I welcome you, Madam. And Madam is going to discuss on good clinical practice. So I'll hand over the session to Ma'am.
Good morning, one and all. So I take this pleasure to thank Madam and my department for giving me this opportunity to participate in the AICTE sponsored quality improvement program. So I welcome you all delegates for this, and today's topic, which is good clinical practices. So today we are going to hear about this. So many a times you might have heard this 100 times like. So just I'm going to give the overview of the good clinical practices, what actually we practice at our site management office, as Madam already mentioned, that being like practical or having the practical exposure. And I take this opportunity to thank my HOD, Dr. MS Ganachari, for giving the opportunity to work in the clinical research department. So because of which we are going to discuss here the practical aspects as well as some GCP guidelines and all. So to see that what we are going to discuss in our today's topic. So already to know that what good clinical practices we have or we are practicing, we should be knowing what is good clinical practice, need for good clinical practice, what is, in short, historical background of good clinical practice, principles of good clinical practice, and there are different good clinical practices which are practiced globally in India. So what are the differences between different GCPs? What are the responsibilities of different stakeholders, and in all the summary of the GCP. So here, to define the good clinical practice. So already we have the standard definition everywhere. So just to tell in general, what we have the good clinical practice. So you don't have to just see that what is the standard definition, but in practical, how we are going to see what is good clinical practice. So this is the standard for the design. So usually we know that whenever we are practicing or we are participating or as the clinical research coordinators or when we are working in the clinical research departments, so we know that clinical trials are being conducted in the humans. So we are having the different phases. So already you may be knowing phase 1 to phase 4. So where we have to follow some standard ethical guidelines to conduct the clinical trials. So these have to be conducted as per the designs of the protocols. So these protocols are given by the sponsors, which are being conducted at our site or different sites of the globally. For this, the standard, some designing will be there or protocol will be there. So how that design is, who has designed that? So that protocol is a set of standards which are designed from the side of the sponsors. They will be having their team. So that protocol team will be developing the protocol. So whenever it comes to the site for implementing the protocol, So how it is being conducted and how the performance of the clinical trial will be there. So for that, we need to have proper monitoring, auditing, recording, and analysis and reporting of clinical trial. So these are the stages which require to have the good clinical trial. So always we should have the proper designing, conducting, performing, monitoring, auditing, recording, and analyzing and reporting. So if you see the slide, we are following. For that we require, whenever we conduct a clinical trials, whatever the data we are taking from the clinical trials, so that data has to be credible, accurate, and it should follow the right safety, integrity, and confidentiality of the trial subjects. So usually, like in the clinical trials, whenever the participants are there, so either they will be called as the participants or the subjects. So it is very important that it is just not that we have to conduct the clinical trial only for the scientific purpose, but there are two phases of the clinical trials where it includes both scientific as well as the ethical part. So for the data to be scientific, we have to have the integration of the data. It should follow the ALCOA principles, or recently we have the ALCOA plus principles, where it defines that the attributable data, legible data, contemporaneous data, original data, and accurate data. So always whenever we have the data of the clinical trial, it should be legible, it should be accurate, it should be contemporaneous, original, and accurate or attributable. And apart from this, recently, whenever everything was focused on the data, saying that it should be very accurate, it should be very legible and all. But whenever we define this, so then the question was started, like, whenever this data, as in the papers, you show that everything is good, but as actually when the data is looked, so is this accessible for the, whether it is the access, the whenever any regulatory team comes or whenever comes, anybody comes for the monitoring, is it accessible for them? Is it available for them? So whether the data, when they see in personally, whether it is complete or not, whether it is consistent or not, or whether it is enduring or not. So these all components were added later on to define that the data has to have the ALCOA plus characters. And as I said, very important part of the GCP is the ethics. So here the ethical part, or we have to respect the right, safety, integrity, and confidentiality of the trial subjects. So these are the two phases of the good clinical practice, which has to be followed in the GCP. Now, why we need GCP? So already we saw the definition of the good clinical practice. So always, as I told you, your data has to be very well integrated, and the right, safety, and well-being of the subjects have to be good. Like for that, we have to check that whether they are following the good clinical practice or not. So to prevent research misconduct, we need good clinical practice. To protect the rights, safety, and welfare of human participating in research, then assurance of the quality, reliability, and integrity of data collected, to provide standards and guidance for the conduct of research. So just we don't say that the clinical trials are being conducted only in the papers. It's actually, we have to see that whether they are following all the standards and guidance which are given by the local guidelines, which are given by the national guidelines, which are given by the international guidelines. So here to say, we have the good clinical practices which come from the WHO, which come from ICH, which come from the ICMR, and we are having the national guidelines which are from the ICMR. So all these have to be followed to have the good clinical practice. So these are the needs which we want the good clinical practices to be conducted when we are doing the clinical trials. So just like yesterday, we have seen very elaborative historical background of how the clinical trials, the fair or the ethical clinical trials, for that what were the historical background which led, or tragedies which have led to the good practices. So just in short, I will go through, because already we have touched, sir has taken this part. So just to brief, in the 1937, we had the sulfanilamide tragedy. So this was the drug which was given. So It was given like it was earlier, it was in the form of the tablet and powder form, but when it has to be given for the pediatric population, they started it in the form of liquid or the elixir form. So for that, they use the solvent called as the diethylene glycol, so which is the toxic in nature. So later on, you can see that when it was given in the pediatric population, like over 100 people died, many of whom were children. So both for adult and children, it was tried, but many of them were the children who had this tragedy. So this led for the US Congress to come up with the Drugs and Cosmetics Act 1938. So here, like this is the historical or the, before this we had many tragedies, but where we can document saying that this act started, which is a very important act which we follow till today, like which is the base for all the controlling the drugs and cosmetics. So this first was the this like rule came. Then in thalidomide tragedy, already we saw after like 1930s, in the 1950s, we had the thalidomide tragedy. So this already, you know, maybe knowing this is a sedative which is used. It has the sedative effect which was used in the morning sickness in the pregnant woman to avoid the morning sickness. So it was taken. So that time there was no idea that it is going to have the teratogenicity and the neuropathy in the fetus. So later on, when the children were born with the phocomelia, so it was seen that the drugs need to have the safety checking. So thalidomide was not approved in the US for morning sickness due to lack of safety data, but there was thousands of victims worldwide. So later on, when it was seen that the thalidomide tragedy has led to phocomelia, the US did not allow this drug for the pregnant women to take for morning sickness, but in some part of the globe, we still have the practice of this. So it need to have the control on the use of this. So this led to drug amendments like Kaffir-Harris Amendment directiveness, which says that there are some drugs need to be checked for safety during the pregnancy. Then next, like we have the historical background of GCP in that the Nazi medical war crimes. So already yesterday in detail, we have seen the medical experiments were performed on thousands of concentration camp prisoners. They included deadly studies and tortures such as injecting people with gasoline and live viruses, immersing people in ice water and forcing people to ingest poisons. And there were some other like trials which were conducted in Jewish chronic disease to see the hepatitis, then Wilbrook study. So many are there, like we have so many tragedies. So which all like the Nazi medical war crimes led to the Nuremberg Code in 1947. So it took place at Nuremberg in Germany. So it was named after that. So many people who were involved in that, they were punished or sentenced to death. So you can see at the left side, the trial is going on. So as we discussed yesterday, many of the physicians or the other people who were involved, they had this one trial. But the victims of this who suffered, they have to suffer, they suffered long, their lifelong, the suffering is there. But this act which was brought, it showed that the people require, who are conducting the clinical trial, they have to, the participants who are participating, they have to give the voluntary they have to have the voluntary consent. So it's not the forcible participation, it should be voluntary. Then informed consent, they have to take consent. Nowadays it is audio visible. So like both audio or the video, which consent is there. So now again modification has come that the video consent is restricted to the new drug molecules or for the pediatric population. So this like then the another one of this major this in the Nuremberg Code is not to harm those who are participating. At least if you cannot benefit the participant, not to harm the patient. So these are under the Nuremberg Code. Then came the Declaration of Helsinki in 1964. So this gives well-being of the human subjects. It gives importance for the well-being of the human subjects. So always we have to have more benefits compared to the risk. So always the protection of the rights of the human subjects is very important. Then later on, Belmont report 1979 and like how human research protection, it has to be carried out. Later on, we had the Belmont report and the OHRP, which says that respect for a person, like autonomy means whenever any subject has to participate in the clinical trials, so he should be asked, or no, there should not be any like outside coercion to participate. So it is his or her own decision to participate. Means we have to respect the person for the participation in the trials. Then beneficence and non-maleficence. So beneficence is again like there should be more benefits compared to the like the harms, and always it should be told to the participants like what both by participating what they are going to have the benefits and the risk. And non-maleficence is again like always if cannot do good, do not harm the patient. Then justice. So whenever anything like the adverse events or a serious adverse event occurs, so all the justice has to be given to see to it that the patients are given the medical treatment in time, or they are given the compensation for that. So these all come under the different historical perspectives. So this is the where you can see how it progressed, like from the oath of Hippocrates in very long back in the 460 BC till 1997, and later on we'll see that how the new regulations or new amendments have come, so which all contribute for the good clinical practices, and which we later on like we call the ICH GCP guidelines, WHO guidelines, or we call the Indian GCP. So all these are like whenever we have seen the good clinical practices are there. So initially like the base was like with the GCP, and later on it has become as the ICF GCP. So these are the 13 core principles of good clinical practices. So already you might have heard many times, but just I want to brief on this, like what are these 13 principles, because the good clinical practices always have to have this basis of these principles. So clinical trials should be conducted in accordance with ethical principles that have their origin in the Declaration of Helsinki and that are consistent with GCP and applicable regulatory requirements. So this says that anytime when we are conducting clinical trials, so they have to be in like in par with the origin in the Declaration of Helsinki. They have to follow the Declaration of Helsinki and all other ICF GCP or any local or the regulatory requirements. So as we know, in our country, we are following the ICMR guidelines for the conducting of the clinical trials, all in accordance with the Declaration of Helsinki or ICF GCP. So before a trial is initiated, foreseeable risk and inconvenience should be weighed against the anticipated benefit for the individual trial subject and society. So whenever we receive any protocols for the ethics committee review, so always our main intention will be that to see that what the protocol or what the study is going to benefit the patients and the society. So what benefit are there for the society, just for the sake of conducting or by not by like neglecting the risk or in which are involved in the protocol. So just it is not that it is a thorough of all the EC members who are going to thoroughly review the protocol to focus on this aspect. So first component we have seen that we have to go according to the regulatory requirements. Second one is like we have to see to it that it should benefit the patient and the society. The third one is very important, that is rights, safety and well-being of the subjects are very important consideration in the saying that the rights, the autonomy has to be given for the patient. It should be safer, whatever in which clinical trial they are participating, and well-being of the trial subjects. So whenever they are participating, we have to look that whatever the benefits they are getting out of the protocol or whatever the risk they are undergoing. So all they have to be looked very properly, and anything if it happens, like it has to be immediately addressed. So these are which are going to focus on the rights, safety and well-being of the trial subjects. So next is the available non-clinical and clinical information on investigational products should be adequate to support the proposed clinical trial. So this shows that whenever we are receiving the list of the documents for submitting to the ethics committee, one of the very important component what we require is the investigational brochure. So which give the information regarding the preclinical or the clinical data. So for example, if anybody wants to conduct the phase 3 study, so we should be having the preclinical study data as well as the phase 1 and phase 2 data. So if ever again like post-marketing is being conducted, so the data till phase 3 we should be having. So this gives a fair idea for the principal investigator who is conducting the trial that what are the outcomes of that trials in the preclinical stage or the whatever the previous clinical stages of the clinical trials. So this is very important part which gives the non-clinical as well as the clinical information, or if any trials are being conducted, means that is the animal studies also data is required. Clinical trials should be next is clinical trials should be scientifically sound and described in a clear detailed protocol. So as I told you, one of the documents which is necessary for us is the protocol, because protocol is the one which gives all the contents which shows that what is the background for that clinical trial, what are the study design is there, what is it is the intention of conducting the protocol, then what is the rationale of that, what is the study design, what is the methodology, and like what are the risks and benefits involved in that, how long or the duration of the protocol is, then like whether if it is covering any safety data or not. After completing the protocol, what will be the outcome of that? So all these are to be mentioned in the protocol. So we want the dossier of the protocol to be complete, along with we ask usually the insurance which is specific to the clinical trial, which is specific to the participants. And apart from this, we want that protocol to be registered or the clinical trial to be registered with the CTRI, or it has to be having the CDSCO permission. Then it will be coming with the ethical permission. So all these are necessary, and the protocol which we receive should be clear and detailed. Next is a trial should be conducted in compliance with the protocol that has been received to prior institutional review board or independent ethics committee approval, favorable opinion. So now whenever we receive this for the ethical review, so once it is reviewed, if there are any thing missing in the protocol, it will be suggested for the principal investigator to communicate to the sponsor saying that these are the deficiencies or the protocol is missing these contents. So they approval will be given, on the conditional approval will be given. So once they satisfy that, it will be final approval will be given. So this is what SOP we are following at our site, so that whatever the deficits are there in the protocol, they can be fulfilled. For example, if an informed consent is there, so where they are not specifying for the subject participant that they are giving the traveling allowance or the loss of wages, if they are not specifying in that, or if they are not specifying the name of the ethics committee chairman or member secretary, if anything happens, they have to contact that person. So these are some things which we are going to communicate, saying that it has to be in the proper, to get the approval, it should be conducted in compliance with the protocol. Everything should be, documents should be there. Next is the medical care given to and medical decisions made on behalf of subjects should always be the responsibility of a qualified physician. So one of the important aspects in conducting clinical trial is that the principal investigator who is conducting should be qualified and experienced, and he should be knowing that how to take care of the subjects who are participating in the clinical trial. Next, each individual involved in conducting a trial should be qualified by education, training, and experience to perform his or her respective task. So the delegated people who are in the trial, for example, principal investigator, sub-principal investigator, clinical research coordinators, research nurse, research phlebotomist, they should have the appropriate qualification for that to participate, to be the part of the clinical trial. They should have the appropriate education, training, experience. If they are still not having the experience in that, So they can work under, like they can get trained and they can be part of the clinical trials. So this is the very important part, because we are the people who are going to see that the patients or the participants who are participating in clinical trials, their well-being is very important. Because of our negligence, it should not, the safety should not be affected, or their well-being should not be affected. Next is freely given informed consent should be obtained from every subject prior to clinical trial participation. So this is very, very important, because we have very wrong notion everywhere in the public saying that they are forcing the people to participate in the clinical trial. This is very wrong thing, because the voluntary informed consent is very important. Unless the person gives voluntary consent, the informed consent is not valid. So it becomes a protocol violation, saying that the consent has not been taken voluntarily, or the consent is not signed by the participant, or it is not taken with his permission or her permission. Next is all clinical trial information should be recorded, handled, and stored in a way that allows its accurate reporting, interpretation, and verification. So what happens when we know that participants have participated, we have taken all the appropriate measures to make them participate, but if the data is not properly stored, so once the trial is over, but somewhere you have stored that whenever you need that to be interpreted, you are not getting the data, or whatever you have recorded or handled, so that has to be stored properly. So this requires the proper storing with the proper systems where you are storing, that has to have the access of the people only who are conducting that trial. And whenever somebody comes to monitor, or whenever somebody comes for verification, it should be easily available. So that is why we have the ALCOA plus this guidelines, which says that whenever the access is not there, how they can see those data, how they can interpret or assess that. So this is very thing which is required. Next is the confidentiality of records that could identify subjects should be protected, respecting the privacy and confidentiality rules in accordance with the applicable regulatory requirements. So this says that whenever participants are there, it is not that the information is like their information, personal information is not for the public. Like you shouldn't say that, okay, that lady from that place came, she is participating in our clinical trial. So we have to maintain their privacy and confidentiality, and this will be shared only with the regulatory authorities or only when any legal matters comes. So this is specifically specified in the protocol, saying that we are not sharing any of the information unless any regulatory requirement is there, or if any legal issues come. Next is investigational products should be manufactured, handled, and stored in accordance with applicable good manufacturing practice. So already we know that whatever the IMP we are using in the clinical trials, they have to be stored properly, or they have to be handled properly. So we have in our setups, like usually wherever they are conducting the clinical trials, the IMP logs will be maintained, at what temperature they have to be maintained, when they are stored, when they are taken out, which patient they are dispensed, and whether they are following all the guidelines or not. So this has to be there in your protocol or wherever the clinical trials are being conducted. Next is systems with procedures that assure the quality of every aspect of the trial should be implemented. So whenever the systems which are being used, they should assure the quality. It's not that we are dumping all the data in some systems which are of not quality and which are not following the guidelines. So these are some 13 core principles of the GCP, which like we have overviewed. Next is, as I told you, we have different GCPs which have been developed accordingly. Like you in the initially, there is a GCP from the WHO which shows that the guidelines for good clinical practice for trials on pharmaceutical products. We know now we are discussing that how trial participants should be treated, like when we are conducting clinical trials, who are responsible for that and all. But these were the on the basis of first, like if we are using the IMP or the pharmaceutical products, what it has to follow, means what has to be guidelines have to be followed when the GCPs for the pharmaceutical products. For the human participants, we know, but what about the pharmaceutical products? Then overview of the GCP, WHO GCP says that whatever the protocol says, like what should be the experimental design, what should be the randomization and blinding, statistical analysis. For example, to give, like if ever we are having any RCT design study, so which in the RCTs, so whether you are having a standard and the placebo, so you have to justify that why placebo is being given here. So this is, and what statistics you are following to finally to interpret the data out from the placebo and the other group. And handling and accountability for pharmaceutical products. So now, like, for example, if you receive the IMPs, what happens like after the trials? Are you going to destruct the IMPs or are you going to send them to the sponsor? If you want to destruct, what is the method by which you are destructing? So that all comes in the handling and accountability. Then role of the drug regulatory authority. So here, what are the general responsibilities on-site inspections? So how the regulatory authorities are monitoring all this about the IMP. For example, like for vaccine trials, the vaccines in the will be received by the site, they will be stored. So is it that if they have to be followed 2 to 8 degrees, then are they correctly being stored in the 2 to 8 degrees or not? So if ever suddenly, if any regulatory inspector comes, so these will be checked. Or if ever single vial has to be used, whether they are using the single vial, if multiple vials they are keeping, what is the reason for that? Are they discarding after using the single dose? So all this will be there in the role of the drug regulatory authority. Then quality assurance for the conduct of a clinical trial, consideration for multi-center trials. So all this information is given in the WHO GCP, which mainly focuses on the pharmaceutical products, how we have to follow the guidelines for this. So in the ICH guidelines, we have the quality guidelines, efficacy, then safety guidelines, and the multidisciplinary guidelines. Now coming to ICF GCP. So we have seen that in the history of the ICF GCP, the International Conference on Harmonization, it came up with the ICF GCP. So here, like the guidelines are with consideration of the current good clinical practices of European Union, Japan, and the United States, as well as those of Australia, Canada, the Nordic countries, and the World Health Organization. So India will be is going to be part of this in the future. Like so, these are the countries which have come up with the ICF GCP guidelines, which are following. And at present, we are following the ICMR guidelines along with the ICF GCP. So some of the sections which cover ICF GCP, E6, that is glossary, principles of GCP, EC or IRB responsibilities, investigator responsibilities, sponsor responsibilities, protocol and amendments, investigators brochure, essential documents. So this will give the sections which gives us the idea that how we have to, what principles of the GCP, the all principles of the GCP, what are the responsibilities of the ethics committee, what are the responsibilities of investigator, sponsor, protocols, what should be the investigator brochure, or what should be the essential documents. So this will be mainly in the ICF GCP, which earlier came. So whenever we are having the good clinical practices, we are defining that to be ICF GCP or OHRP GCP or the FDA GCP. So in this, we are having the 21 CFR, 45 CFR, 46 international. So these all will say that ultimately all will come to one conclusion. So there may be some in saying, like for example, when we say that ICF GCP informed consent, so they say that anybody who is part of the clinical trial, who is qualified, who is having experience, they can take the consent of the participants. But what our Indian GCP says that only the principal investigator has to take the consent from the participants. So these are some minor changes which we can see accordingly, which will differ with the GCPs. So here, official for human research protection, which says that the IRB is informed consent, women, prisoner, children, like we saw yesterday, like vulnerable population or special population, how they have to be treated. So this focuses on the human research protection. And the FDA focuses mainly, you know that this is usually the all acts will be there in the FDA, which will focus on the electronic documents, informed consent, disclosure, IRBs, INDs registration. Then ICH International focuses on glossary, principles, IRBs, investigator sponsor responsibilities, essential documents. So initially, when we had the GCPs, so this was the requirement that they have to fulfill with this. Then, like coming to the good clinical practices. So we all know that we have the different good clinical practices, but who we are responsible, who should follow the good clinical practices? So mainly we know that because we are conducting the clinical trials, or if we are the participants of the clinical trials, means like or the protocol is developed by the sponsor, and if ethics committee has to review these protocols, so and regulatory authorities have to permit for this, so all these people are responsible for following the GCP. So that is why we have mentioned here the sponsors who will provide us with the protocols, investigators and site staff, sorry for the repeated this, those who are the part of the clinical trials, then contract research organization in case sponsor is assigning their work to the CROs, then ethics committees, so who are reviewing the protocols, then regulatory authorities who are reviewing this and giving the approvals, then research subjects who are the participants of that. So these all are the stakeholders whom we call as they have to follow the GCP, or they are responsible for the good clinical practices. So what are the goals for the good clinical practices? To protect the rights, safety and welfare of human participating in research, because this is the core thing which we saw that what is the definition for the good clinical practice. So this has to be one of the goal, that it should protect the rights, safety and welfare of the human participating in research, to assure the quality, reliability and integrity of data collected, to provide standards and guidelines for the conduct of clinical research. It's not only, if you follow only one thing, it is not the goal of the GCP. Along with protection of the rights, safety and welfare, you should also have the proper quality, reliable and integrated data. It should be in accordance with the standards and guidelines for conducting good clinical research. So good clinical research, in common we can say that it is the integration of ethics, integrated data and standard guidelines. So these are the code of federal regulations under Title 21, which says that, so we are having the different codes which shows that under 21 CFR 11, electronic records and signatures are there. So which gives us the information that how the records electronically they have to be maintained. If you want to have the electronic signature, what is the SOP for that? Then 21 CFR 50 says protection of human subjects, like what human subject protection rights, what have to be followed, how you have to follow, what is the standard guidelines for that. 21 CFR 54 says financial disclosure by clinical investigator. So this is also one of the important aspect, that what are the CTA, which we call clinical trial agreement. It covers all the financial disclosure by the clinical investigators and the sponsor and the where the site it is being conducted. 21 CFR 56 says IRBs that oversee clinical trials, like how they are going to, what all components they are going to check, how they are going to give the approvals and all. 21 CFR 312 says investigational new drug application, and CFR 812 investigational device exemptions. So these are giving us the federal regulations saying that what you will get the information in all this. Now coming to the responsibilities, as already we have seen that the very important stakeholders who are there. So among them, we have the sponsors, we have the principal investigator, we have the CROs, and we are having the team of the members who are involved in this, as well as the research participants, the regulatory authorities. So we'll see one by one that what are their responsibilities while following the GCPs. So principal investigators, adequate resource to conduct study. So here, whenever principal investigator take up any studies, they have to see to it that All the resources are in place to conduct the study. All staffs are qualified and trained. So whomever they are taking in their team, they should be properly qualified and they should be trained. Appropriate delegation of all study tasks. So it's not that just, okay, we are having the team of the people. Okay, randomly we cannot, as principal investigator cannot assign, okay, you do this, like this. There should be a proper delegation saying that what the principal investigator does, what sub investigator does, what CRC does, what research nurse does, so on, so on. So this all should be properly given the delegation for everyone by the principal investigator. Communication with the IRBs, this is very important. Whenever anything communication is there, so it has to be properly communicated with the IRBs, because the lack in the communication can have the protocol deviation or the protocol deviations. So violations or the deviations. So the communication is very important. If ever they are not getting any in time, any compliance with the GCPs, they have to communicate, they have to have the what is the solution for that. So these are some things which they have to have with the IRBs or the institutional ethics committee boards. Ensure compliance with study protocol and all SOPs. So it is very important that whatever protocol is there, like line to line, it has to be followed by the principal investigator. If they have any problem with the protocol, there will be called the investigator meeting before starting the study. So they have to discuss that, or before starting the study, the team will be visiting from the sponsor. So they have to clarify and they have to get it amended, the protocol. Proper informed consent process. So just like we have seen many times, like just they will come and ask investigators, we will be out of town, will not be able to take the informed consent. Can we assign the other people to take the consent? So this is not possible. So as our Indian GCP says that the principal investigator has to be there when the informed consent process is going on, and in front of him only it should be carried out. All trial related medical decisions. So whenever any decisions have to be taken, because it is going to have impact on the safety of the patient. So it is the which matters. The PI responsibilities are very important in this thing. Then randomization procedures and unblinding. So how the medications or the IMPs are given, whether they are following randomization procedures or not. For example, if ever the placebo is there, the group is there. So while dispensing the medication, they have to have the eye on that the proper medication is given as per said in the protocol to the particular group. They will not be knowing which medication will be there, but at least assigning to the correct randomized group is very important. Then investigational product accountability at site. So as I told earlier, whether they are properly stored or not, whether they are properly dispensed or not, whether they are properly discarded or not, it is the responsibility of the PI. Then safety reporting. Again, if any adverse events occur, serious adverse event occur, if you are not reporting in time, so that is going to have a very this impact on the clinical trial what they are conducting, because safety of the patients or the participant is very important. So they have to follow the guidelines or the time in which they have to report it. Review all protocol deviations if any. So again, if any protocol deviations are occurring frequently, see to it that they will not occur, or they will have the some this from the ethics committee saying that these are the number of protocol deviations which they are occurring, and maybe sometimes memo will be issued for the investigator or actions will be taken. Records and reports, data handling, maintain essential documents. So documentation is very important, that how well they are documenting their the data. Now responsibilities of sponsor and CRO. So this investigator, when the protocol comes, it is the responsibility of the principal investigator or IMP when it is received. But before that, when the protocol is sent by the sponsor, they have to see that whatever the they are selecting the sites, they should have all the adequate facilities. They should have the adequate principal investigator, trained investigator, qualified investigator, or team should be proper. So this all says that sponsor CRO responsibility is to select well qualified, trained and experienced investigators for the conduct of trial. The selected investigators should be based at the institution hospital, having sufficient resources to properly conduct the trial. Allocation of duties and responsibilities. Prior to initiating a study, the sponsor should define and allocate all study related duties and responsibilities to the respective identified persons or organizations. So this is which says that as a principal investigator, equally the sponsor is also responsible for the good clinical practice, or if they are given by the sponsor to the CRO. So in combiningly, like sponsor and the CROs, they have to assure that they are conducted as per the good clinical practices. Then responsibilities of the ethics committee. So this is very, very important, because as we know that the clinical trials should have the good scientific approach, as well as very important is they should follow the ethics. So the ethics committee comes into the picture here. So it should focus on to protect the dignity, rights, and well-being of the potential research participants or the subjects who are participating, to ensure that universal ethical values and international scientific standards are expressed in terms of local community values and customs. For example, like if ever any protocol says that it is the international guidelines will say, okay, and they are not matching with our community values or customs, then the ethics committee has the rights to say that according to our setup, this protocol is not, it will not be like feasible to be followed. So they can make some amendments in the protocol. So this is the like right of the ethics committee. They can communicate with the PI to assist in the development and the education of a research community responsive to local health care requirements. So the ethics committee also should see that whatever the clinical trial is being conducted, it is going to benefit the participant as well as the society. The additional responsibilities: no clinical trial should be initiated without obtaining a written approval by the IEC. IEC should obtain the following documents: trial protocol amendments, written informed consent form, and consent form updates that the investigator proposes to use in the trial, subject recruitment procedures, that is, if they have to advertise, they have to take prior permission, written information to be provided to subjects, investigator brochure available for safety information, information about payments and compensation, the investigator current CV and other documentation, any other documents that the IEC may need to fulfill its responsibilities. So in addition to this, whenever they review the protocol, they have all the rights to say that whether the protocol, they have to give the conditional approval or the full approval. If they are fulfilled, all the factors are fulfilled, or if there are any amendments to be made, they can suggest, or if anything regarding, like if it is risking the subjects, then that can be mentioned by the IEC members. So in the Indian GCP, it came in December 2001. The expert committee set up by Central Drug Standard Control Organization in consultation with clinical expert has formulated this GCP guideline. So Drug Technical Advisory Board has the highest technical body under D&C Act, has endorsed adoption of this GCP guideline for streamlining the clinical studies in India. So these guidelines have been evolved with consideration of WHO, ICH, US FDA and European GCP guidelines, as well as ethical guidelines for biomedical research on human subjects issued by the Indian Council of Medical Research. So now at present, like as I told you, we are following the Indian GCPs. So these are the different GCPs which involve the technology, risk-based quality management and the oversight. So we are having 2016 ICF GCP R2. So now there is a revision in this going to happen, like ICF GCP R3 is going to be implemented. So this is how the picture shows that at the different level, how ICH E6 R2, at present R2 compliance has to be followed at the level of the like quality agreement, CRO oversight plan, automate the plans, real-time oversight. So this is the overview of the compliance, how we can achieve the compliance at the different levels, whether it is at the sponsor level, it is at the site level, investigator level, participant level, or how we can have the like newer technologies to improve the GCPs. Then Schedule Y Drugs and Cosmetics Rules 2005, notification of the 20th January 2005. So there is amendment to Drugs and Cosmetics Act 1940. So this is the Gazette India notification, which says that regulation and guidelines for permission to import or manufacture of new drugs for sale or to undertake clinical trials. So it has outlined extensive study criteria in line with globally accepted formats such as ICH and US FDA guidelines. So as already I mentioned, this follows the rules 122A, 122B, 122D, 122DA, 122DAA, and 122E. Now the new amendments have come recently, which shows the Gazette notification 30th January 2013 amended, which are focusing on the compensation for SAE. Like previously, it was told that the 2013, it was told that anything related to clinical trial, when any serious adverse occurs, whether it is related to IMP or not, they have to be compensated. Later on, because of some hinges, it was modified. It was said that anything the SAE related to IMP only will be compensated, and proper compensation should be given as per the formula given by the DCGI. Then ethics committee registration. Compulsorily, ethics committees have to register with the CTRI. Audio video recording of informed consent process was proposed, but later on it was little modified because of some cultural hinges. Then it was told that for all the new molecule, we require audio video recording. And then for some like population where we require to have video recording, and some like waiver of video recording in some population like HIV AIDS or the leprosy patients. Then there, because we require to have the confidentiality. Then academic research need not to have the DCGI approval, though they can be taken up by the ethics committee, they can give the approvals. Then inspection by regulatory bodies. So recently it has been said that CDSO can have the inspection even with the sponsor. They can even inspect the sponsors, inspect the sites. Then new NDCT rules have come in 2019, which are little bit modified with respect to the like newer guidelines with the COVID and other guidelines are introduced in this. This is a very nice to go through the new NDCT rules 2019. And we have the Sugam portal, online portal for application for the it has been made as the recent online mode platform to apply for the clinical trial to initial permissions from the DCGI or the CDSCO. Then recent ICMR guidelines 2020 we are having. So this is the slide which shows at our site we are maintaining all the standard operating procedures of the documents with the guidelines with the good clinical practices, and we are mentioning on the SOPs. And like at the left side you can see that even one of our student has the barcode for the these all files, where it shows the barcode. When it is clicked, all the information can be tracked from the files. So this summary to take up or take home message is: data and reported results are credible and accurate in clinical research. They have to be very credible and accurate. Protection of the rights, safety and welfare of humans participating in research is very important. Standards and regulatory guidelines to be followed for the conduct of clinical research. All stakeholders are responsible for the GCP. So this, I would like to conclude my talk. If any questions, I'll be happy to answer. So always, I would like to believe life is a learning process. We must keep learning. So if anything I can learn from you, I welcome that. So if any questions are there. So just as like to take the attendance, I think yesterday sir told, just so you can have your videos on the screen. And if anybody is there, like you can unmute yourself and we can go for the questions. Otherwise, we'll wind up with this session. attendance liya. We'll conclude. Okay, thank you everyone. Excuse me, we have the next resource person. So after 10 minutes, we'll have a 10 minutes break and we'll start with the next session at 11:45. Good afternoon, everyone. We apologize for the delay in starting the second session. So we have with us the next resource person. Sir, actually, he was little busy in the other task. So I would like to give a brief introduction of Sir. So Sir is a very senior pharmacologist. Sir he was professor and HOD of pharmacology department. First he served in Jain Medical College Pharmacology Department. Then he joined for the USM Malaysian KLE IMP Belgavi Medical College. So Sir has completed his MBBS MD in 1970 and 1981. So Sir has more than 27 years of experience in the PG and PG experience. Total length of experience is 37 years. So Sir has guided more than 15 MD, 40 MPharm and 4 PhD students. Sir has, to his credit, won the cash prize for best paper presentation. He was ex-member of Board of Studies, Karnataka University, Dharwad, life member of IPS and APPI, Vice President IPS for the year 98-99, ex-member Board of PG Studies, RGHS Bangalore. He was elected as President APPI Local Branch for the year 2001. He is recipient of Dr. Kamal Kodkini Memorial Best Teacher Award for the year 2005-06. Elected Senior Vice President Indian Pharmacological Society 2005-06. Chairman Ethics Committee RMRC ICMR Belagavi. At present, like he is the member of Institutional Ethics Committee. So he is working as a scientific member as medical scientist for our Institutional Ethics Committee, KAHE. He is also member of Animal Ethics Committee. He is member for various ethics committees. So he has, to his credit, more than like number of goes on, like, I don't know, publications, so many are there. So very many national and international journals. So Sir, this is a very brief introduction which are given, like Sir was not ready to introduce himself, but always we have his very good inputs for our ethics committee, and he is a very renowned pharmacologist. I can say that one renowned pharmacologist in India. Like, we are very fortunate to have him on our board. So we welcome you, Sir, and I request you to start the sessions.
Thank you. Yeah. Now, I again apologize for delay because of some other unanticipated events. Now, I think I will begin with my topic, assigned topic, without wasting your time. And the topic that is assigned to me is Human Ethics Committee Management. I don't know how many of you are aware of these clinical trials, and whether in your institute the ethics committee is existing. If so, then you may be aware of the things which I will be covering now. It is only for those who have no ethics committee in their institutes and not heard of clinical trials, how they are conducted, particularly ethics committee and its functioning. For them, I would like to introduce how the ethics committee management is carried out. Okay, we'll begin. The biomedical research or the clinical trials was first introduced by an Arabic Iranian physician, Avicenna. And I would like to say that he is the founder father of clinical research. The details, I will not go through that. He introduced the concept of experiments in medicine and gave the basic theory of clinical research, how it is to be conducted. I mean, the concept he developed is wonderful. He wrote a code called as Canon of Avicenna. It says that the effect of drug must be seen to occur constantly in many cases, not in only one. If it doesn't happen, then it was an accidental effect. That means to say that it is a repetition of the observation should be seen when the same drug is administered to the similar patients. And he also further mentions the limitations of the animal experiments. Experimentation must be done with the human body only, not in the animals, because testing of a drug on a lion or horse might not prove anything about its effect on man. That still holds good, but of course, some of the animal experiments are mandatory still to proceed with the clinical, prior to the clinical research. You may be aware that it is the preclinical studies to test the pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, route of administration, dose determination, etc. has to be preliminarily carried out in the animal experiments, and then it can be tried in the humans. So the take-home message is Avicenna, Arabic physician who was born in Iran, now which is his birthplace is in Kazakhstan. He can be called as a father of clinical trials. Now, taking the heel, or you can say the idea of this Avicenna, people started experimenting on the humans. This is after Second World War, the Nazis, that is German people, they started on experimenting on war prisoners. They were curious to know what would be the effect of freezing on the human body or hypothermia. If we infect the person, how the disease progresses. These are the things which they wanted to study, and they made use of, the prisoners. And this was very uncruel event. And this opened the eyes of many people, and they were a bit concerned with this type of studies. That is in 1939, this started. And what happened, that some of these public activists, leaders, took it to the court of law, and as a result, the punishment, I will come to that later on. Based on the same observations, Tuskegee syphilis trial started in United States. It was a very long project, right, starting from 1932. It was concluded in 72, almost about 40 years duration of the study. And that they wanted to infect the people with the syphilis and see how the disease progresses, whether it can get cured by itself without treatment. And you please remember that by the time this trial was going on, penicillin was available for the treatment of syphilis. And not using any medicine to treat, they allowed the people to die. And as a result, what happened, that this Nuremberg trial, because of this Nazi crimes, it was discussed in the court of law, and 16 were found guilty and crime against the humanity, 7 were found not guilty. Of 16, 7 were hanged till death, and 9 were sent to the prison for 10 to 40 years. And followed by this, in Germany, Nuremberg Code was set in. Know that? I'm sorry. This Nuremberg Code, after the direction of the code and some human appeals, the medical profession was forced to come out with this code. According to this, degree of risk of a particular drug that is to be tried in a person should be weighed against its benefit. Precautions against even remote possibility of injury or disability or death should be anticipated, and that should be prevented as far as possible. Experiment should be conducted by scientifically qualified persons. Subject should be able to end experiment at any time. That means what we now call it as an autonomy, voluntary participation and voluntary fallout from the study. And scientists must be prepared to terminate the experiment if the experiment is likely to result in injury, disability, or death of the subject. Based on this only, in US, I was referring to the Tuskegee syphilis trial. Then President of US, Bill Clinton, ordered to investigate and find out the guilty people. Many were punished there, and subsequent to that, National Commission submitted the Belmont Report. This is famous as the Belmont Report, and in 79, this was submitted. Now this Belmont Report is supposed to, or it is deemed to be a Bible for the reviewing research protocols. This committee also recommended appointment of an institutional review board or IRB or institutional ethics committee, what we call, to review the human subject studies. And they also told that they recommended that standards for appointment of IRB, record keeping, and overseeing the research activity has to be incorporated in this. Based on this Belmont report, they emphasized more on three principles. First is respect for the persons who participate in the clinical trials. Respect in the sense, they should be informed about the details of the study, and if they voluntarily admit to participate in that, then they can be included. And whenever they want to quit the study, they should be allowed to do so. This is what is called as a respect for the person. This is most important. Second is beneficence. The study outcome should be beneficial, at least if not to the participants, but population at large later on. Then justice has to be done. And that is the communities, the justice, all these, justice has to be done, and that should be kept in the mind, particularly for this Human Ethics Committee. Human Ethics Committee involves three components. There is a principal investigator, research protocol, subjects, that is research participants. What Human Ethics Committee does, of course, this Human Ethics Committee is also called as IEC, Institutional Ethics Committee, or IRB, Institutional Review Board. These are all synonymous. And Human Ethics Committee is to be constituted by a competent authority. This is as according to the Belmont report. Chairperson should be from the outsider. That is, outsider means not out of the place where the ethics committee exists, but it is out of the institution. And this next member is member secretary, who is the most important person in conducting the proceedings of the meeting, circulating the protocols, fixing the meeting, and he is also a bridge between the sponsor and the PI, you can say. And in our institute, we have got the site management office where these facilities are provided to the PIs through these sponsors. Then, most important members of this ethics committee include layperson, a social worker or social scientist, what we call, legal expert. These three are very important to make the quorum sufficient to conduct the meeting. If any one of these people are not there, meeting becomes, or it has to be cancelled or has to be postponed. And to not to postpone or cancel, then you can have the duplicate these people also. If somebody is on leave, or you can say that due to some adverse situation, he or she cannot attend this, then you can have the spare persons. Then basic medical experts. A pharmacologist is a must, and other 2-3 disciplines you can have 2 or 3 members, such as biochemistry, physiology, you know that. Then clinical experts, 2 to 3, even they can be 4 also, belonging to different disciplines, not from only one discipline. Medicine person, OBG person, pediatrician, oncologist, like that. Then sometimes, if the IMP is very specific for a particular condition and where it is beyond the scope of dealing with by the members, clinical experts or some experts can be invited to participate in the meeting. These invited experts need not be for every meeting. In a particular event, say some vaccine trials are going on, the expert on vaccine can be invited, or some altogether new drug which is beyond the scope of any of these members of this ethics committee, then the expert can be invited. All these members of ethics committee need to be conversant with the ICH GCP guidelines, and they should hold the certificate issued by this ICH GCP. The facilities available online, or sometimes the workshops are conducted, and these people need to undergo that training and possess a certificate, and then which is valid for 2 to 3 years. And all ethics committees, these human ethics committees, we prepare the SOPs, standard operating procedure, and accordingly the committee functions. And these standard operating procedures can be modified time to time depending upon the need, and new versions are circulated to all the members. Here I would like to stress that functioning of this ethics committee, member secretary circulates the protocols whenever the protocol is received by SMO, or that is the site management office. He circulates these protocols to all these members well in advance, at least about a week prior to the scheduled meeting. And he decides the date of meeting, venue of the meeting, and whether it is sometimes online or physical, that is offline, that is decided. It may be a hybrid mode of meeting also. That is about the functioning of ethics committee. Here, what is the management of this ethics committee? Ethics committee manages, all the components of this clinical research. That is the principal investigator, research protocol, and subjects. These are the 3 important components of the clinical trials. And now let us see one by one about what is this? Committee oversees or supervises principal investigator's credibility and competency to conduct the trial. How we do that? The PIs have to have or possess this ICH GCP certificate. That is the eligibility to conduct the clinical trials. It means that he is conversant with the good clinical practice guidelines, and then he can proceed with the received trial. Whether he has got any conflict of interest, of course, we will be knowing if the new drug has come and if he is the advisor to that pharmaceutical company, then it becomes very difficult. We may not entertain this project to be carried out by the particular principal investigator. We go through that. Then next, what is wrong with this now? Not moving already. Human ethics. Just see. Should I go back? Now, the task to ethics committee task of the ethics committee becomes easy if evaluating PI, or you can say PI concerned with the protocol, if he evaluates the study. How he can evaluate? The guidelines are provided. Does the study ask an important or valuable question? He should ask after going through the protocol. Is the study designed reasonable? Then second thing, what he should ask is, would I be able to do justice to the trial? Whether it is beyond the scope of his ability, then he should not accept it. If he can do that, then he can accept that trial. Would I take the drug? Huh?
You can see here,
that is not seen to them either. They should also be able to see, no? Okay. He should ask himself that if this drug can I or would I give it to my family members? I can take it safely. If it that proves that the drug is quite safe and he can proceed with that. These are the questions to be asked by the PI to himself. And then the task of the ethics committee is easy. If based on his response to these questions, he can reject or accept the protocol. Then next, protocol completeness. This is most important task of our management by the ethics committee. All protocols will have, in addition to so many things, the investigative brochure, IB what we call, and this explains in brief the study design regarding the pharmacology of the investigational medical product and inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria, and so far the earlier clinical trials or non-clinical or animal studies to prove that its safety or its toxicity, and it may be of the IMP or it may be of the device if it is to be investigated. Then next important component of this protocol is DCGI's permission. All these protocols need to be permitted by the DCGI to carry out the clinical trials. Then, does the protocol contains the informed consent forms? These informed consent forms, depending upon the location of the study, need to be in local vernaculars. You may get the participants talking different languages. In all those languages, they should be prepared. Not only that, verbally they need to be explained to the participant if the participant is illiterate. In that case, relative of the participant or legally approved person or relative can go through that and he can educate the participant. These informed consent forms, I think we need not go in detail. It is not possible also. This includes nature of the study, how it is conducted, how the drug is administered, what the benefit the patient is likely or participant is likely to get or not get, whether this investigational product, is it injurious or whether the patient has to pay for that. Or you know that other medications, if they are to be administered concurrently with this IMPs, who will bear the cost of that? Is it implied with the additional cost to the participant? All these things are to be considered. And this insurance particularly, it caters the compensation for the health related hazards. It may be an injury, or it may be a reversible or serious adverse effect, hospitalization, and or unfortunately often it may result into the death. And this, in such cases, the participants need to be compensated monetarily for the suffering they undergo. Then most of these drugs, including the one which we are using day to day, they are not totally devoid of adverse drug reactions. And if the adverse drug reactions which are anticipated, what is the mechanism of monitoring these adverse drug reactions? You may be aware that some of the clinical trials are conducted at the hospital level. Some may be conducted on the ambulatory patients, that is, the drugs are dispensed and they go home and they follow the instruction to take the drug and they will be reporting. In such cases, ambulatory patients, it becomes a bit difficult and some other arrangements are to be made and frequent inquiry, at least telephonically, to identify whether the patient has developed any adverse effect. Such mechanisms, are they included in this protocol? You know that is overseen by this ethics committee. Approval of trial. After considering all these things, even I think I have forgotten that all the trials have to be registered under national, you know that, National Trial Registry. You know? This has gone. I think CTRI registration, we call it, that is Clinical Trial Registration of India, that has to be registered there. If all these requirements are met with this protocol, then the committee, maybe through voting process or unanimously, may approve or reject the protocol. Next slide. ಏನಾಯ್ತು ರೀ ಇಲ್ಲಿ? ಹೌದಾ? ನೀವು ಕೊಟ್ಟ ಟೈಮ್ ಮುಗಿತು ಬಂತು, ನಾವು ಮುಗಿಸ್ಬೇಕಲ್ಲ. I think if there is no immediate next session, then I can extend for 5 minutes or so. No? ಈಗ ನಮಗಿದು ಜಮಾಯಿಸಿದ್ರಿ ಇದು ಆನ್ಲೈನ್ ಹಾರಿಬಲ್. That is that I think protocol completeness is okay. Then next,
This is next.
next, okay, thank you. Then next thing what ethics committee manages is research participants, pertaining to the research participant. How the consenting procedure is going on. The committee can oversee the consenting procedure, verbal narration of the consent to the subject. Was it correct, or did it include all the components of this ICF, or what is called as informed consent form? Then provision of sufficient time to the participant to decide about the participation. You can't force him. Now you decide whether you want to enter into the trial or not. You cannot force that. Sufficient trial. The person may consult the relatives before consenting to participate in the trial. Then financial implication to the study participants. This is important. Sometimes, particularly in pediatric trials, a child, we cannot expect the child to come alone. Child has to be accompanied by one of the parents at least. And if the parent is working person, to bring the child for the visits, that is the follow-up visit of the trial as scheduled in the protocol, then he would be losing his daily wage. Whether this daily wage is compensated by this trial people or the sponsor. Sometimes investigational medical product is such that it may start some adverse effect, mild, and which need to be controlled by administering some other drugs concomitantly. Who will pay for these other drugs? Because the person is participating and he is subjected to take investigational product, then the other concomitant medicines which are supposed to be taken prior to this IMP need to be provided by the sponsor at free of cost. Then next is, there are certain protocols. The patient or participant has to come repeatedly for the follow-up visits. Maybe every month, every week, depending upon the nature of the protocol. And if he has to come for this follow-up visit, who will bear the transportation charges of the participant? Sometimes he may be coming from the distant place, and these, whether such a provision is there in ICF or not, will be seen. Ethics committee oversees that. If these things are not included, we will not immediately approve this project. and we, through PI, we contact the sponsor, and if the sponsor agrees to bear these, then protocol is okay and it is approved for the executing the trial. So the ethics committee management is at the PI level, protocol level, and research participants. In addition to that, ADR monitoring. Sometimes if the patient develops severe adverse reaction, then the patient needs to be admitted and he has to be properly treated. Ethics committee oversees such an incident, and a PI explains the occurrence of this adverse drug reaction, when it occurred, was it temporarily related to the drug administration, what is the outcome of this, what care was given, and did the reaction resolve or patient developed a sort of permanent injury, or whether person lost his life. These are the things are to be presented during the trial if these incidents take place. If it is patient has recovered or the participant has recovered from the ADR, what was the causality? I mean, what was the cause for this reaction? Was it related to the investigational product or some other drug, or it is a progression of the disease itself? This needs to be addressed by the ethics committee. Some ethics committees may form a subcommittee to go through that with the experts, and because this is important, there is a clause that any ADR, serious adverse drug reaction, needs to be treated free of cost till its causality is assessed. See, once the patient is admitted and physician or the PI will start treatment for that, say after 8 days, person resolve, and then the report is submitted to the ethics committee, which is analyzed and causality is assessed. And if ethics committee feels that it is not related to the investigational product, then there is no question of, say, compensation for that. And if whatever the expenses that are incurred by the person for the treatment is to be borne by the sponsor till the causality is assessed and is proved not related to the administered investigational product. And if it is related to that, whether or not, that subsequently, if it is related, then the till person recovers, the free care has to be provided. If the causality is assessed after, say, about 1 week or so, and if even the person is still there in the hospital under the care, and now ethics committee decides that it is not related to IMP, after these 8 days, the cost has to be borne by the patient himself or the participant himself. Sometimes there are some anticipated adverse reactions. Maybe they are minor, related to the gastrointestinal tract, that some minor headache, fever, etc. Particularly injection site, if the drug is administered parenterally, swelling, induration, inflammation, these things can occur. And whether the preventive measures were taken by the PI, this is overseen by the ethics committee. Then management, of course, what drugs were given, was it effective, and what was the outcome? These are all analyzed before that is, the information is sent to higher authorities. Then the next task of the ethics committee is study follow. Once the trial starts, it has to be followed up by the ethics committee. PI is supposed to submit the follow-up or the progress report every 6 monthly or every year, depending upon the nature of the project. Then next task of the ethics committee is to archive the records. These records are to be kept. Of course, there is no specified, not less than 3 years. It may be extended up to 5 years sometimes. These are the responsibilities or the management which the ethics committee undertakes. Looking at the Tuskegee syphilis trial, you know, the Tuskegee syphilis trial, it was 40 years duration trial, I told. Many died, many survived also. The purpose was to follow up the natural course of syphilis, what happens to these people. And some 8 or 10 people survived, and a report was submitted to the then President of US, Bill Clinton. He apologized to those people who survived, and he saw that all medical expenses were waived off for the survivors later on. And then he made lifelong free medicine or free medical treatment. And of course, looking at these things, Frederick Nietzsche, he says that man is the most cruel animal on the earth. Looking at, and it is true also, wild animals kill when they are hungry. Man kills not for his hunger to feed himself, but for several things. That is the last but one side. And I think this medicine has been defined to be the art and science of amusing a sick man with frivolous speculations about his disorder and of tampering ingeniously till nature either kills or cures him. Thank you for patient hearing. Why this is, I am going back, I think. Yes, thank you. Michael.
Thank you, sir. If any participants would like to put up any questions. If there are no questions, we'll conclude this session. Thank you all. We'll be starting the next session at 3 p.m. sharp. Please all of you join before 3 p.m. Thank you.